Well, let me start with center-based programs muna. Being the Artistic Director of Cultural Center of the Philippines, may platforms na talaga dedicated to developing playwrights. No? Of course, Virgin Love Fest, obvious, which is meant really, it's a playwrights festival more than anything else, putting the playwright in the middle of this collaborative process that we've been talking about. And hopefully, which hasn't happened yet as much as we'd like to, that these plays are picked up by professional theater groups and make it part of their repertoire. No? Hindi pa masyado tayong successful doon. And that needs to be investigated why somehow it hasn't reached that kind of dimension. But definitely, I think the Virgin Love Fest has produced a whole new generation of writers who've written one act, full length, and even moved on to television and film script writing and enriched that whole world. VLF now is planning to go regional and trying to establish a VLF in CDO para naman magkaroon ng platform yung mga non-Filipino or Tagalog writers. No? Ibig sabihin, baka pwede na Bisaya, no? Or other languages like Ilonggo and so on and so forth. Yan yung isa. Pangalawa, we have the tawag namin the intertextual division. Hindi siya, it used to be the literature division, but we've chosen to make it intertextual. The idea is literature, dahil Performing Arts Center needs to interact with the performing arts, with music, theater, dance. So, nagkaroon ng iterations yung written word as spoken word, as multimedia performances, and so on and so forth. So, nandoon yun, no? Nandoon din yung possibility nun of something written to be performed and interacting with different performing arts forms. Pangatlo, nandun yung mga resident companies natin, specifically yung Tangalang Pilipino, which is supposedly one of our groups that should be able to mount original work. Again, medyo kulang dahil, I guess, budget, no? Tsaka number of plays na pwede nilang gawin in a year. So medyo nagiging very limited din yung kanilang choices in terms of picking up from the new works. But definitely, the road should lead there in terms of new works, whether one act man to or full-length plays. So, yun ang and of course publications. Now we have the publication anthology, and at some point we're going to in the pipeline we're looking at online scripts, making available these scripts of VLF online for people to access.
We are trying to start up the PETA laboratory, which is every September. We're trying to do that. Hindi lang siya playwright, actually it's kind of multidisciplinary, and so it can be different, it can be dance, it can be whatever
devised work.
Devised. So hindi lang siya, no, pero yun yung isang platform. Pero like we were having that conversation the other day, really this whole idea of I sometimes think the reason it doesn't, some of the stories may not be brought to the bigger camps kasi for PETA, the ones that we produce, they have to be bigger plays, and the Virgin Lab is already conceptualized as a small play. So to expand it would really take time. And siguro again, we're going back to that idea of time, no? Baka it kailangan either pag nagko-commission ng work na bago yung playwright, yung nga sinasabi ni Roddy, bigyan ng mas maraming panahon para ma-develop yun. Paano hindi ko sila pwedeng i-harass. Kasi ang nangyayari pag super short, pumapasok ang mga senior writers namin because I don't have time anymore. This thing has got to be fixed. So, papasok si Roddy or si Lisa yung parang ganon. So, I do, understand. So, I think it's really a question of this possibility to, have more time to develop the work. Because if it's going to enter the season at the PETA, of course, you're really investing money in it and everything. And since we're not subsidized, we have to recover that money back. So, there are things na talagang meron siyang mga given. Pero isang gusto ko talagang gawin kasi ako naniniwala ako that you can develop an audience for anything. I'd like to believe that. So, in the same way that we developed an audience for our other stuff, I really think there should really be a window to do these plays that you're doing. Plays from, like what the Virgin Lab, yung mga gusto niyo, yung text, pero it's really funded they're given real monies, real time to rehearse, runs that are mahaba, until you build an audience that will come. And I think they will, but you also need to invest in it. And so I hope over time that we find that way to balance that, to hopefully do that to the lab. I want it to be regular and longer, so that's the objective. And also, I think, how do we access these writers for our other projects? Let's say, for the Arts for Arts for Democracy project that we want to get into this coming year. So we want to work with the regional theaters, diba? And they should be creating their own plays. How can we access your writers so they can maybe work with the groups? Alam mo yun, para we can also connect them with the different activities already. Para meron silang platforms to perform, to write for, di ba? Or in a university, can it be written by like a university theater festival, and it's all the writers from from the Virgin Lab, di ba? Parang, and then we have that kind of thing. So you have, these guys are also something semi-professional already, di ba? They're not naman all fresh off the boat, and then, but they're working with the student group, mga ganon. But and then create new works, and it's like a university festival. So I think it's also thinking up of ways where we can, put the writers in a particular platform where we can, kasi I always say this, I think if Roddy and Lisa have become the writers, it's because their work have been produced. Okay? I mean, it's not because from the time they were born, they were perfect. So, yung kailangan dumaan sa proseso, pero yung time to write. So, pero, nagsulat sila and they got produced. So that's my dream. I really want to be able to contribute to creating those spaces for the writers. Kasi naniniwala talaga ako, you need to be produced. That's the only way. And even if you fail, it doesn't matter because you need to fail. You need to see your work up there. If it doesn't work, well, let's move on, next video. So that's the dream of how can we really get these guys to be produced. It doesn't have to be big productions all the time. But I think yung ininvestan mo, makikita mo siya, may design, may actors, may time, may panahon, yung gano'n. Yung sana mahanapan siya ng platforms. But I will try within the framework of the pets to make more space for you guys.
Great.
Thanks.
Yung Sipag Lawin Ensemble sa company ay nag-i-initiate ng mga programs, projects for independent makers. So ito yung mga walang institutional backing o walang usual na support from big companies. At so 2019 to 2021 lalabas yung second installment ng Carnaval Festival. Isa siyang performance and social innovation performance. Kung ang Lab Fest ay isang festival para sa mga playwrights, ang Carnaval naman ay may platform for prototyping new works kung saan ang mga writers at iba't ibang mga artists ay nagsasama-sama. So nagma-matchmaking kami. Tapos meron itong Lagablab Artist Residency Project kung saan may opportunities ng iba't ibang artists, writers to work with non-artists, for example, anthropologists, kailangan on board, or architects.
Grant ito? Grants? Hindi naman.
Yes, grant-based.
Parang grant-based.
Yeah. So, yun yung, dahil nga kami ay isang independent company, kung anong makuha namin grant, ginaganon namin sa mga hindi maka-access sa grants kasi nga wala silang mga SEC registrations, wala silang mga business, etc.
Right.
So, yun yung ginagawa namin. So, minsan, importante talaga ang space. So, space at mga people na kasama. So, yun yung importante. So magkakaroon ng regional hubs, mga regional residencies, may isa sa Mindoro, may isa sa Baguio, kung saan in 1 week or 2 weeks yun ang gagawin mo, gagawa ka ng work, etc. Dapat funded siya. So yun yung hinahanapan namin. Na-mention kanina about artist education, na kasabay ng audience education, ng artist education, pareho din yung development ng new work. So merong dinodocument yung practices ng mga bagong artists o ng mga emerging artists sa kanilang early years. May dokumento series, malalaman yung iba't ibang process, lalo ng mga contemporaries. O at mostly sabi na generational do yung work namin. But yun yung ginagawa natin, dinodocument natin yung mga artists na eventually baka hindi magtuloy-tuloy kasi wala kang support yung works, pero may interesting processes. At yun yung encourage namin, once na may online database, baka pwedeng matuto from them. So yun, at merong blank ticket and informal school. Meron kaming blank ticket university kung saan based on your capacity, social economics, depende lang magkano kaya mo. Informal school siya for artists and writers and devisers kung saan pwede ka mag-aral ng basic education, ng history, ng arts theory, etc. Kasi minsan nga, ang galing, ayun yung experience namin, maraming mga artists ang simula na either from entertainment o magaling talaga sila kumanta, tapos gusto ko na magsulat o gusto ko na mag-direct, pero paano nga, mahirap pumasok ng UP or bihiring opportunity. So, at the same time, pag gusto ko gumawa ng feminist na play, pero pagtingin mo, ay, super sexist. So, yung mga basic na ganun pa lang, mapalad, privileged ako siguro, at maraming mga artists kasi may sapat at tamang edukasyon. Pero, yun, to make that available, even yung understanding ng history, ng society, importante. So, yun yung mga platforms, residencies, at saka yung may opportunity ka lang na 3 years yung development naman. So, this year, magpipitch ka ng work, tapos next year, iti-develop, tapos on the third year, baka fully iproproduce. So, yun yung, so writers, working with non-writers, yun yung, yun yung transmedia at intermedia na ini-encourage.